Hey guys, it's another video for the mini-series. Mateo here today, and I'm going to deliver to you a little insight on one of my really pivotal books that dismantled my framework, took me out of a cave, and get me get over my fears. It's called 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. Really quickly, the very first thing about this book is his approach of his writing style, and I think a lot of people are turned off by it, and I was initially turned off by it as well. It's something called the realist perspective, and that's his analytical framework of the book as well as the way he writes. And what does that mean? He's a very blunt, and he comes off as a kind of cold-hearted author, but when you see his writing in the very intelligent and meticulous way he plods through ideas, it can either be one, really scary because of the insight it brings in, or two, when I read it the second time, it's something that kind of engages you more and says, wow, there's a depth of field that this author is able to delve through in his analysis. And that's the first nugget of the book, the idea of the realist perspective. So when I took that on, what does that mean? It's looking through life through a lens where you have to start taking account of the things you want to get out of life. It shouldn't be something where you're just being a submissive, or you're just someone who's reacting to everything spontaneously where others are taking advantage of you. In a way, this realist perspective draws into a selfishness, but it's an interesting kind of selfishness that in the first time I didn't understand. I thought it was take all, be all, give nothing back, be greedy, but rather it's a selfishness that in the beginning will protect you, and then the goal of the book, Power, it's a selfishness that then brings you onto another level and start being able to take control of things. And he's consistent throughout the whole book. The second golden nugget of the book is these 48 laws are technically life principles, and it's the idea that these are observations that when you can consistently and objectively apply into certain situations in order to again bring out an outcome that's most favorable and desirable for you. And this is handy because we go through life, we create our own kind of sets of principles and frameworks through situations, but often we forget and kind of haphazardly would change it for pragmatic purposes or something that was convenient for the time and the moment. What I like about having principles, 48 laws that are steadfast and, as Robert Greene argues, are consistent throughout history, means that the value you get out of those principles are powerful. The output, the result, your end goal is more attainable because you have these strong, hard, fast principles to look into. And so I'm really happy that he's able to collate principles that you can take, reject, bring together, thematically linked for you to use. Third nugget. And this is more like a personal thing. I really like how the way he presents these principles is by a look into history. I'm a history buff. I love reading all kinds of history, ancient, modern, different leaders. And this is the third gold nugget because it's a recognition of how powerful these agents of the past are in presenting human behavior, psychology, situations, or demonstrating how things happen from A to B, so causation and result. History is very, very good as a canvas of a demonstration of the human psychology. And taking that to the next level, Robert Greene gets these people, extracts their behavior to extract the frameworks, to extract the principle for us to use across history. Because me recording this, we're becoming part of that history. And I find that really, really helpful. The fourth point, and I touched upon this earlier as a foreshadowing, the idea of people and psychology. The 48 Laws of Power is ultimately an exploration into the human self and the interaction of different humans. And going back to the realist perspective, it's realizing that everyone has a different agenda, multiple degrees of said agendas, and then emotions come into play. So you have this huge amalgamation of complex competing ideas and things motivations, and that's all in one person. Imagine you get 3, imagine you get 2, right? And then now imagine you have to manage a whole country. Imagine you're Machiavelli. And so all these complexities come together, but fundamentally, Robert Greene is saying, look, people operate in certain ways, and there are principles to understand the dynamic, and then start to play into the dynamic to get the outcomes that you want. So much of it again, it is psychology, but I'm not saying, oh, it's a narrow lens and he's saying this is exactly how people operate. No, be very careful. It's the realist kind of perspective that takes these kind of motivations and selfishness lens to describe those things, which again is insightful. And I'm not saying it's a universal imposition of that structure. It's just one way to kind of be mindful and see like, well, this can be true in some cases, and it worked for me, right? The final point, the bottom line of the book, right? It's in the title, power. When I read through it, it's a huge reconsideration of that word, of that term, of that idea. And initially it was something I ran away from because again I was afraid, and definitely I even envied it. Like, oh, here's a guy who knows about power, and if I'm reading a book about power, that means I don't have power, right? And there was that initial dynamic, and then finally when you become a student and humble enough to read the book and pick it up and realize power has so much more depth of field. Like I said, it's not a narrow one-way just object of selfishness and greed, but rather it's a climate where agents come together and certain results and outcomes come out of that. So I think with this book, it takes me one step closer to understanding what power is, how it's used, who operates in it, what's the psychology of power, what's the psychology of getting into power. And so that's the 48 Laws by Robert